call the meeting to order. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Fry. Here. Director Plow is not here. Director Shagowitz.
Here.
Director Morgan. Here. Director Wicks.
Here. Okay. We have speaker slips, and if anyone is going to want to ask questions or speak, please see Lois, who's over there, and she will hand you a speaker slip that you'll have to sign. Nick, since this is a meeting for a special purpose, we're going to skip items not on the agenda, and do you want to take it from here then?
All right. Well, welcome to the district's second public workshop for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. I'm Nick Turner, the district's general manager. Also here tonight is Jane Gray and Matt Nafley, both from DUDAC. The district brought on DUDAC to assist the district through the SGMA process for the Montecito Groundwater Basin. There's not a lot of people here, but to start, if I can get a show of hands as to those of you that attended our workshop on March 2nd. So the majority of you, for those of you that did attend, this presentation will be fairly similar to the one that was held on March 2nd. We will be providing an update on our progress, though. So tonight's agenda, we will be giving a general overview of SGMA. We will be talking about the SGMA legislation, the formation of groundwater sustainability agencies and their purpose, the formation or the development and implementation of a sustainable or a groundwater sustainability plan. And we'll also provide an update on the district's progress since the last workshop. What have we been up to? Coordination and agreements with the City of Santa Barbara and Carpinteria Valley Water District, and also a basin boundary modification. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers from anybody that has them. Before I hand it over to Jane, we would request that we hold the comments to the very end. That way we can get through the presentation. And as President Shagowitz suggested, we do have speaker slips that are with Lois. And if you would like to speak, we would appreciate it if you'd fill that out and provide that to her. So with that.
To a 3-minute time frame. So why are we here tonight? We're here to talk to you, get your thoughts on the process, get some questions answered, to communicate the overall importance of local and reliable groundwater resources, particularly for the Montecito Water District, give you a little bit of a primer on the overall SGMA process, and talk about how that is being implemented in the Montecito Groundwater Basin. So our identified community concerns, and this is based on dialogue with the community and items that have been expressed to the Water Board. Seawater intrusion, potentially implications of cost, basin overdraft, local stewardship, the need for preservation of the Montecito aesthetic, including landscaping, the agricultural uses within the basin, stakeholder and community involvement, water rights, metering of wells, drought protection, and water quality protection. So all of these come into play in the large overview as we talk about SGMA and groundwater sustainability planning in the basin.
Right. As Nick said, my name is Matt Nafley. I'm a principal hydrologist with DUDAC, and I'm going to talk about a few of the more technical issues that we have. In the square one is what is a groundwater basin, and this is the actual definition. It's the area that lies above the aquifer in a sense, and It's composed of soil that's saturated with water, and usually it's contained within bedrock like a bowl full of soil. And then the state recognizes only alluvial aquifers. They don't recognize bedrock aquifers. And you can also get groundwater from bedrock in certain cases, but the state regulates and deals with only the aquifers, such as Montecito. This is just a very simplistic cross-section that shows what a basin is, and the tan part there at the bottom is the bedrock that contains the aquifer, which is the blue, and the blue is essentially grains of sand and gravel that are saturated with groundwater. And there's a number of ways that water gets into or out of a groundwater basin and an aquifer, and that can be through stream flow in or out. It can be from adjacent basins, and Santa Barbara and Carpinteria, there's some connectivity with the Montecito Basin. And then in Montecito, of course, there's the ocean, and groundwater can flow to and from the groundwater basin through from the ocean, depending on whether you have groundwater overdraft or under normal circumstances, fresh water will flow out to the ocean. This slide just shows why groundwater is important in Montecito, partly because in an average year, it provides about 4% of the district supplies. And then in the drought year of 2015, that was as high as 16%. And you can see that also state water went quite a bit higher in 2015. And one thing about that is that not in all circumstances will that much state water be available. And the longer the drought, the more important the groundwater. So in future droughts, or if you consider this still to be a drought, groundwater could be even a more significant supply than shown here. This is called a hydrograph, and it just shows the elevation of the water level in a particular well in one of the storage units in the basin. You can see that it was fairly consistent, and then we hit the 86 to 91 drought, and it dropped pretty substantially, but recovered rather quickly at the end of that. In this current drought, it dropped significantly, more significantly, and even though we had over 125% of normal rainfall last winter, we are still dropping, and the water level there is about 35 feet above sea level. Just to get you oriented, this is the area and the basins, Montecito, Carpinteria, and Santa Barbara, as defined by the state in Bulletin 118. And this also shows the service areas and jurisdictions of the city of Santa Barbara, Montecito, and the Carpinteria Valley Water District. And we're going to zoom in a little bit more to get some detail. I mentioned the storage units earlier. Those are essentially, whoops, let me go back. Went way ahead. Okay, so storage units are essentially individual basins within a sub-basins within a larger basin. So this is storage unit 1, 2, and 3, and they're separated by faults. And in the case of Montecito, it's not well known what the interaction between those storage units are. In other words, whether they're completely separate or partially separate in terms of groundwater interaction between them. This is the city of Santa Barbara and Montecito area overlap, and you can see it's fairly complicated. There's places in which the city serves water over the Montecito Basin, and within the Montecito jurisdiction, there's places where the Montecito Basin is within the city of Santa Barbara jurisdiction, and pretty much every combination thereof. So it's a little bit complicated on that west end. On the east end with Carpinteria, it's simpler. There is an area here of overlap between where Montecito's Basin is actually within Carpinteria Valley jurisdiction. And we'll talk about that a little more in the presentation.
So I think by now, really, everybody is aware of what SGMA is, Sustainable Groundwater Management. And it was passed in 2014 at the height of the drought, essentially to give jurisdictions and water districts just more tools to work with communities to have a better understanding of how groundwater is used and how to manage it more appropriately throughout the state. So why are we doing it here? We're looking at undesirable results ultimately with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and some of those potential undesirable results defined by DWR are shown on the next slide here. So chronic lowering of groundwater levels, and I think you can see from the previous slide, the hydrograph that was shown, that your groundwater basin necessarily has not recovered as it had previously. So SGMA is a tool to deal with some of the issues with overall lowering of groundwater levels. Another undesirable result, as defined by DWR, is a significant and unreasonable reduction in groundwater storage. Another one is the degradation of water quality. So obviously, as you continue to draw down your basin, your water quality also tends to deteriorate the less water you have in your basin. And land subsidence, which is not an issue here in Montecito. Surface water depletions and those having significant and unreasonable impacts on beneficial uses. And beneficial uses are all the uses of water that we talk about, from recreation to consumption, and seawater intrusion. So what is the importance of SGMA and groundwater sustainability planning? In the context of this basin, it is your drought protection. The most local source of water that you have. And as users and residents, this is something that you want to protect. It's an asset. It's a critical part of not only daily use, but again, in times of potential unreliability in other portions of the system. So as we move through this process and get to the end of GSA formation, that's where we dig into groundwater sustainability plans. And groundwater sustainability plans is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of visioning for your basin, looking at all the uses that you have, and ensuring that you are going to manage and put projects in place to ultimately have sustainability and balance. I'm not going to read you the slide. There's a number of different items of importance. So we spoke to you in March, and we're back again, and we want to give you an update on the status. So we can skip through 2015, 2016, 2017, we're in now. This is our second stakeholder engagement meeting. And as we move into 2018, that's when we're going to kind of pick up some speed. And we have drafted a memorandum of agreement. We've already signed and executed an interim memorandum of understanding with the Carpinteria Valley Water District on the basin boundary modification that we're doing there. And as we move forward, we will be considering another MOU with the City of Santa Barbara. Once those are reviewed both by City and Carp Valley Water District, and those are signed, it'll come back to the Montecito Board for a resolution. The resolution would form the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and then once completed there, we would file with the Department of Water Resources. Department of Water Resources has 90 days after filing to approve or deny the GSA formation. I don't think that there would be any reason that Department of Water Resources would deny it, but there's a 90-day period, and that's open to public comment and review. And presuming that's all wrapped up with a bow, then the district would move forward to pull together an RFP for groundwater sustainability planning. And as we're not on a timeline right now with the groundwater sustainability planning, we haven't really outlined the beginning points and end points. But if we potentially start in 2018, in all likelihood, we could get a good solid GSP, groundwater sustainability plan, to the Department of Water Resources in 2021. And then that's where projects and programs would come in. Am I not going the right way? Okay. So just to kind of recap again, groundwater sustainability agencies are just your governing authority. It is just like the water board. So the groundwater sustainability agency formed by resolution would be the same set of folks that are sitting up here right now. So the water board and the GSA board would be exactly the same. And the authorities that they would have would be, in this case, Water Supply Authority, Water Management Authority, and with the Montecito GSA, the Land Use Authority would remain the County of Santa Barbara. The tools of the Montecito Water District GSA would be the ability to do basin boundary modifications, establish new subbasins, register wells, measure groundwater extractions, prepare annual groundwater extraction reports, levy extraction limits, and then fund the GSA and ultimately the GSP. Okay. We talked about the governance. And we have covered a little bit of the GSP, so we can dig a little deeper into this. GSP planning, as we talked about, would commence after GSA formation, probably within a 2-year time frame. And it would involve largely some of the things that we're doing right now, community engagement and outreach. But the technical aspects of the plan are the meat of what the groundwater sustainability process is about. So it will look at the hydro conditions of the aquifer, the historic and projected water demands, areas of recharge, and places in the basin that are appropriate for recharge projects, measurable objectives and milestones towards sustainability, and an overall monitoring and management plan. So as we work towards sustainability, definition of a sustainability point is the key to a groundwater sustainability plan. The GSP for Montecito Basin would address the following: usable storage, safe yield, quality of water, interaction of storage units, seawater intrusion, projects and programs, and feasibility and cost analysis. So all of this is based on a number of technical documents that will be prepared as part of the groundwater sustainability plan. That is something that hasn't commenced yet, but certainly historical data will be used. And new studies will also be required in order to get a current snapshot of how the basin is behaving. And the goals of the GSP, just broadly for Montecito, would be to obviously to preserve the local control of the groundwater basin with the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Respect for the overlying and other proprietary rights to the groundwater. Acquire technical and vetted information, so scientific information upon which the best decisions can advance. Implement projects and programs. Projects and programs will be part of the overall groundwater sustainability plan as it moves forward. And again, that's a community process that will be driven by the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, any technical advisory committees, and community involvement. And then project and increase the sustainable yield of the overall basin, as well as protect and enhance groundwater quality and quantity. Funding for the GSA and the GSP. So at this point, costs are not yet defined. There's obviously a streamlined aspect to the overall costs because you have the same board structure, you have the same staffing structure. So there's no duplication. There's the potential for the GSA and the GSP to be funded by user fees. And the GSA would likely initiate a study for water rates in order to carry on with the business of GSPs. Basin boundary modification, we can move on to that.
So the state has a process to modify the boundaries of basins as they're currently defined by the state. And they have to be based on either a scientific or a jurisdictional basis. Scientific refers to an actual structural or geologic or hydrologic reason for moving the current boundaries. Jurisdictional is generally done to make it easier to manage a basin or more basins. An example of a scientific adjustment might be if a fault is discovered that creates essentially a complete barrier within a basin, it may be appropriate to then separate that basin out into two separate basins or to adjust the boundary. Jurisdiction example, if you're familiar with the Central Valley, it's one massive aquifer, one massive basin, but DWR has defined a whole bunch of sub-basins or essentially separate basins based on which agencies are in charge of those basins. So the DWR is now, that's the Department of Water Resources, sorry I didn't define that earlier. They're currently going through this process. Montecito and Carpinteria have submitted an intention to modify the east side of Montecito's basin, and DWR has just recently said that the process has been delayed, but they expect it to be completed sometime in the first quarter of next year. So the only thing that would be modified through this is that area that we saw earlier that is Montecito Basin as now defined by the state, that overlies the Carpinteria jurisdiction would be included in the Carpinteria Basin. And that's the only change, and that is a jurisdictional modification. So you've heard a lot about SGMA and what it requires. It does require coordination between adjacent basins, and that is what Montecito is currently undertaking with memoranda of understanding with both the City of Santa Barbara and Carpinteria Water District. These MOUs generally talk about coordination. They talk about sharing data that's useful to both basins. We mentioned the basin boundary modification with Carpinteria, and then also it will address how to handle jurisdictional and assessment funding type of issues, and those are underway, as Jane mentioned. So this is the contact information for those who can tell you more. And with that, I think we can go to questions. Turn it back to Nick.
We'd ask everyone to submit a speaker slip, and the only one that I have says Vicky Hazard for Bob Hazard. So, Bob, you want to go ahead?
This is a functional meeting, and obviously it's something required by law, so comments are pretty limited to that. I've seen this presentation twice. My suggestion to bring you and the board closer together would be that what I want to see you guys do is tell us as quickly as you can and at as little cost as we can spend whether or not we have capacity within the Montecito Water District to store water underground, 1,250 acre feet, either state water that we can store for later use during drought, Or if we do desal water, we got to put it someplace, and can we put that underground somewhere? If so, where? And I want to see you and the hydrologists out at USCB and wherever else we can find expert people, sit down in a room, make that decision. The well people in Montecito say they know where to put water underground, so I'd bring them in too, and I wouldn't let you guys out of the room until you guys answer that basic question. Where can we put some water? Where can we store water? Because right now, the only place we're going to store water for drought is up at semi-tropic, and that's in Kern County, and that has to go through the Kachuma pipeline restriction. And so we've got to answer the question very quickly, the one question: do we have any room, Toro Canyon or any place in Montecito, to store water? If the answer is no, we don't, then we say, okay, we got to cut a deal with Carpinteria to store water or somebody else.
Bob, do you, if you have other questions, will you give them all to them and then be seated and let them answer it?
Yeah.
That would make the most sense.
Yeah, anyhow, that's not really a question. That's really trying to say, how do we save money? And what I see this as a consultant's dream. I mean, until 2025, you guys can keep studying this sucker, and we may, when do we get the answers that we need that make the thing? That's my question.
I can respond to. DUDAC did a study in 2015 that basically concluded that recharge in the Montecito Basin is challenging for a number of reasons. But we've been talking internally about some additional analyses that may be able to be conducted that would, I guess, better determine whether or not the recharge of recycled water or desalination in the future would be feasible. And I think that's something that we'll be talking with our operations committee and the board in the relatively near future. So.
And then, do either of you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I would just add that the issue is a complicated one due to the need for residence time. The state requires that there's a certain amount of time that water that's injected remains underground, so that means it has to be within a certain distance of the nearest withdrawal point or well, whether it's a public or private well. There's seismic concerns that has to do with how shallow you want to bring your water table within the distance of the surface. So there's a number of things to consider. There's also the whether it's going to stay put, whether it's going to stay in your basin or flow out to the ocean or to an adjacent basin. So these are things that it may possibly, as Nick mentioned, require a little bit more study.
And then I think Mr. Knight, yes. Do you want to come up and speak into the?
I have kind of a new need, so I'm going to stay right here. I'll just speak loudly.
Okay.
Get up to the podium. And it was a question more that I asked 3 years ago to the board. I have a legal lot, it's a personal question. I have a legal lot that I'm interested in getting water to, and I'm wondering what the criteria for the Montecito Water District will be to lift, once was the moratorium on new meters, to provide what criteria will sustain your ability to offer meters to properties like mine that currently can't get to a meter. And I read between the lines that it looks like this project will take some level of control of wells and monitoring of wells over the course of time. So that was the question that I put on myself.
Nick, do you want to?
Sure. As I see it, there are several criteria that would enable the district to lift the meter moratorium. For one, an end to the current drought, whereby our current water supplies are more plentiful. Or alternatively, we are pursuing recycled water, and we're also evaluating desalination. So at some point, once we've acquired more local, reliable supplies, that meter moratorium could be lifted.
So you don't have a criteria at this point for level of Kachuma or purchase of water? I'm not getting that that's been addressed by the district.
There's not a defined level in Kachuma in which the district would lift the meter moratorium. As you saw from the presentation, the groundwater basin remains severely depleted. Jameson, our own local reservoir, is now right about 50% of full storage capacity. Kachuma, at most, we've received for the last 2 years only a 40% allocation, and unless we receive some significant rain this coming winter, it's likely we will have a very small allocation next year, potentially no allocation. And so, again, if you look at our full water supply portfolio, the outlook, while it's better than it was, it's certainly not close to being ideal. And so we evaluate our water supply regularly, and as soon as we can support additional demand on the system, the board would consider lifting the moratorium.
You had letters out for can and will serve to some 25 people, and when you lifted the penalty phase, you did serve those as opportunity for those people on the list. Is that correct?
Yes, the board modified an ordinance when we received some recovery this last winter, permitting those that had previous, for lack of better terms, a can and will serve letter to request a meter.
What percentage of those took the opportunity of those on your list?
I don't have a number for you. We have it if you want to contact me at the office, I can get that for you. From what I know, it's relatively small, nowhere close to the 25 that were on that original list.
Okay. If there's no other questions, you had 2 other areas you were going to cover? Pardon? Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yes. And would you come forward and use the microphone? Don't be shy.
Hi, I'm Karen Drought, longtime resident, farmer. Now I'm a small farmer, but I live on Tiburon Bay Lane. Tiburon Bay Lane down in the hedgerows. It's come to my attention that one of our major users of water has put in a bunch of wells, and they're using reverse osmosis to get the salt out of the water. And that was a big problem for us farmers and for landscaping when we had a severe drought. You could see brown tips on the avocado leaves and things. But the problem with the reverse osmosis is that half of the water extracted ends up going through our sanitary system out into the ocean. I have the benefit of a well, and I irrigate, and the water goes right back down into our water system and can be reused many times over. But when someone uses reverse osmosis, that's a real problem, and it seems like it's very expensive, but it's also very costly for our environment and for our community. And I just wondered if the district had some concerns about that.
What was that? I mean, certainly there's concerns with that. I'm not aware of any, I'm not personally aware of anyone that has a private well that's treating it via RO. I would imagine that the sanitary district would be concerned with that, with the discharge. But
one of my neighbors is the head of, or she operates the sanitary district, and Oprah is the person who has the reverse osmosis system going. But, you know, it's just something that perhaps the water district might want to address. Because if we're trying to keep our water and use it carefully, that's not a very careful way of doing it.
right. And I think that would be something that would be covered as part of this segment process when we have the ability to get a handle on, the extractions that are currently taking place.
Are there any other questions? Okay, then thank you all for attending.